Hi, everyone. Welcome. All right, I am going to get us started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rabbi Melanie Levav. I am so glad to see you all here today. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of Shomer Collective. So, a little bit of background. For those of you who are new here, welcome to Shomer Collective. We are a startup nonprofit founded about 6 years ago now by a group of friends who had had the experience of someone close to them dying, and they didn't know what to do or where to turn Jewishly, and they knew that they were missing something big, and so they sought to create change in how we plan for and talk about end of life to benefit from what centuries of Jewish wisdom has to offer. So Shomer Collective's work is simply that, talking about death Jewishly, helping you to plan, helping you to figure out how to have the conversation, how to have the conversation regularly, what the conversation might look like, including things like palliative care. Our vision is a world in which we're talking about end of life openly, frequently, and engaging with Jewish wisdom to help us do that. So, a little bit about our name. The word shomer in Hebrew means guard. For those of you familiar with traditional Jewish practice, the shomer is the person who sits with the body from the time of death through burial, literally guarding the body in olden days, as the kids say, from any animals that might catch a whiff or anyone who might seek to disturb the sanctity of the body. And today, the shomer, or shomrim in plural, continue that role. Often members of the Chevra Kadisha, the Sacred Burial Society, volunteers in the community who take responsibility for the ritual washing and dressing of our dead. Folks will take turns sitting with the body from the time of death through burial so that we don't leave our dead unaccompanied. Why was the name Shomer given to us by our founders? Well, the Shomer is understood, in addition to the guarding role, to accompany the soul as it begins its journey of separation from the body. We understand in Jewish wisdom that the soul is contained within our body while we're alive. In fact, we have words of gratitude in our daily liturgy, thanking God for the fact that our soul is still within our body. From the moment of death onward, we understand the soul begins a journey of separation. And so our name Shomer was given to us to evoke that image of accompaniment. How might we use Jewish wisdom in talking about death to accompany you, to support you, to guide you in the work of living more fully into the realities of your mortality? So that's a little bit about Shomer Collective. You can see through our programs that we look at end of life in three parts, three layers. The first is preparing for it. That's the today. How do we live well in the face of mortality, guided by, inspired by Jewish wisdom? The second is that transition level. How do we add Jewish meaning to end of life transition moments, the time of death? And the third is what happens after death. How do we grieve? How do we mourn? How do we do that Jewishly after a death occurs? So today we're here to talk about palliative care, which is a piece of the work in preparing for end of life. And I want to ground this idea of preparing, of palliative care, of questions about suffering in a bit of Jewish wisdom. So I'm going to share with you a story from the Talmud, from the oral law, the collection of the rabbis figuring out how to live after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The rabbis spent centuries looking at how are we going to live now that the way we used to live, worshiping God in a temple, was no longer possible, right? That was sacrificial worship. And then worship became liturgy and language. And there are a lot of stories that we can pull out, other lessons, things about life and death. So there's one story in particular. It's a story of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, and he is suffering from a gastrointestinal ailment. And his handmaiden, the woman who takes care of his physical needs in terms of, daily living, sees that Rabbi Yehuda keeps getting up from his bed and has to go to the bathroom so often. And in the days that Rabbi Yehuda lived, they would wear tefillin, the prayer boxes on your head and arm, throughout the the day, engaging in prayer and study throughout the day with these physical reminders of God and of Torah on their body. And you need to take them off in order to go to the bathroom. So she saw how often he had to put them on and take them off as he kept running to the bathroom. And she saw that he was suffering in this, that he couldn't really stay out of the bathroom, but he wanted to return to his study and had to take them on and put them off as tefillin. And she was concerned about that. And surrounding Rabbi Yehuda's house were his students, the rabbis, the scholars, the leaders of his community, praying for his recovery, as we do when someone is suffering, when someone is sick. They were praying. And she saw how much he was suffering, and she was concerned about his suffering. So she went up to the roof of his house, and she took a big jug, and she threw the jug from the roof down onto the ground in the courtyard outside the house. And in that moment, the noise of the broken jug shattering on the ground startled the students, the rabbis, just long enough for them to stop praying for his recovery. And the wisdom tells us, the Talmud tells us, long enough for Rabbi Yehuda's soul to escape to the heavens. And in that moment, he died. In the moment that his students stopped praying for his recovery, the maid had seen his suffering and allowed natural death to happen by disrupting the prayers for his recovery, seeing that he was no longer in a place where he was going to recover. Now, this idea of suffering is one that you may see in one angle and I might see in another angle. And I imagine the rabbis who were praying for his recovery saw it one way, while the person who was attending to his physical needs saw it another way. The rabbis try to give us some guidelines about suffering throughout the wisdom that we've inherited. A little later on in Jewish wisdom, we come to hear of a category they define called goses, which is someone who is actively dying, often understood as the last 72 hours of someone's life. And we'll understand what that looks like in reality today in terms of palliative care shortly. But this goses, once you are deemed to be actively dying, signs of active dying, the rabbi said we should not touch someone who is in that state of active dying because they were concerned that doing so might hasten their death. Now, for those of us who have been around the dying process, especially those of us here who are trained as end-of-life doulas and chaplains and other healthcare professionals or allied professionals, you may recognize that you want nothing more than to hold the hand of the person while they're dying. And they may have said that while they were able, please hold my hand, don't leave me alone. The rabbis wanted to protect the dying process in a way where death could happen naturally, with as little suffering as possible. And so today we understand palliative care as a way to support someone in health while they're alive to reduce the level of physical suffering. And I am so excited to have here with us Dr. Michael Pottash, who is a palliative care physician and trained in clinical ethics, who was introduced to us by our board member, Karina Tota, to share with us some wisdom about palliative care. So, Michael, I welcome you. And let's get started by telling us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
First of all, yeah, that was a beautiful. I guess, I'm a clinician first and foremost. And so, everything that I'm going to talk to you about comes from that background, from a background of the clinical. As you said, I've studied palliative care, I studied clinical ethics, pain management. I've been drawn to the work of Shomer, and so I'm so excited to be here to be able to talk to what looks like a very interesting group. One thing that jumped out at me when I saw all the messages is there's so many people that do this work, right? I come from like a slice of what I do, but I call myself a clinician, and I think that there's so many different types of clinicians, right? To care for people who are seriously ill and reaching the end of their life, that really takes a village, it takes a lot of different people with a lot of skill set. So I just wanted to at the outset say that I think there's probably a lot of wisdom in this room.
For sure. So tell us a little bit, nice Jewish boy grows up where, gets into medicine, and why palliative care and ethics in particular.
um, I think that palliative care is a bit of, it's a medical practice, it's a medical specialty, but it's also a bit of a, this word carries so much weight these days, but it feels a bit like a social justice path. It feels a bit
Mm,
like a corrective to the overstep or maybe the mistakes of medicine in a lot of ways, or maybe it tries to fill in the gaps in the ways that medicine forgets, right? Forgets to ask people certain questions, forgets that in our search, as you mentioned, for a cure, right, that we don't stop to pay attention to the way that the person is still trying to live their life. Something that I end up teaching to my students quite a bit um, is that when we talk about the risks, let's say, of treatment, right? I have to remind my oncology, I train a lot of oncology fellows, so trainees in oncology, and I have to remind them, one of the risks of doing chemotherapy is that they have to come see you a lot more. And you're
mm.
great, and I'm sure you're really nice to them, but most of us don't want to spend our time at the hospital, going to clinics, or we want to be away doing the things we love with the people we love. And we forget that there's just all these other things. Um, so yeah, I think, I saw during training just a lot of the ways that medicine was forgetting or failing or not paying attention.
Love this idea of palliative care as a social justice movement. Thanks for framing it for us that way, perhaps for the first time I've ever heard that. And I've been in this work for more than a decade.
Well,
So,
I guess maybe
yeah,
I'll tweak it. I'll just say more like
please.
an activism in a way.
Mhm. So, what does it look like in reality? We know plenty of folks who have come to us, dad died of cancer. I didn't know the first thing about this. Why didn't I know about it? And God forbid someone else I love gets cancer. How do I find out more so that I'm prepared next time?
So the first thing that and you'll see how this gets to the answer, but the first thing that when I talk to patients, not the first thing, one of the things I try to let them know is they can ask things of their doctors, of their clinicians, of their nurse practitioners, right? They can ask for things. They're allowed to. They're allowed to say, no, I need more information. And I think most people are pretty surprised by that, honestly. Even today, I think even young people are surprised by that, and they're a little nervous about it. They don't know that they can, um, and I think people don't always know that they can ask for palliative care. They can ask for help when things don't feel right. When they're in pain, they don't have to necessarily be in this type of pain. They can ask for help with that. Palliative care is still, there's just not a lot of us. There's not a lot of clinicians that do this work. And so we're definitely, you can go CAPC, which is the Center for to Advance Palliative Care, has a great website, and they have like a great heat map of all the different places where you can find palliative care. Um, but it's still focused in big cities, academic medical centers. That means that there's a lot of people that don't have access to it.
Mhm.
And smaller hospitals, if they do have access, it might be a nurse practitioner, it might be just a doctor, might be a social worker doing it. And really, real palliative care does require more than one person. I've been in that place where it's just me, and I love the work and I love being that person in the room. But I also, in the back of my mind, I'm always, like there's a whole community of people that aren't here helping me.
You mentioned pain management. What is it if I have the courage and now you've empowered me to ask the doctor to access it? What is it that I'm asking for? Is it to manage my pain? Is it more than that? What can you offer me as an adjunct to my ongoing treatment?
I describe palliative care as the relief or the focus on suffering in all its types: suffering, physical, emotional, existential, spiritual, for sure. Everybody has different needs. I think that the simplest and easiest way for a lay person, or really anyone who's in a bed, who's caring for someone who's a patient, to ask for palliative care is to talk about the physical symptoms.
Mm,
It's generally just more like it'll catch the ear of the clinician who maybe isn't right, who isn't paying attention or who doesn't understand, like, you know, I'm scared of dying, right? You tell that to a clinician, they're going to have a very different reaction to it than I'm in pain. And I could really use an expert who could help manage my pain. So I think when we talk about palliative care, we put the symptoms, we put the physical symptoms first and foremost, because it's
mhm,
the thing that most of us, especially in medicine, are just more comfortable talking about.
mhm. I saw a question come in. We're going to take questions from
Sure.
the viewers later on, but I want to add it to what we're talking about right now. You mentioned, sometimes you wind up alone, being the only one brought in to address in a small hospital system, smaller communities that don't have as many resources. In an ideal situation, what does it look like, right? I tell you, mom is suffering. She has stage 4 cancer. You're brought in for a consult and you help to prescribe the pain management regimen. But what else is possible?
Um, I think it really just kind of moved outwards. So we have like the clinical team, at least where I practiced most recently, we had the um, physician, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, social workers, psychologists, chaplains,
Mhm.
um, pharmacists, case managers, nurses, of course.
Wow.
And that continues outwards, right? And so that can, when the time is right, that can include hospice, that can include hospice volunteers, perhaps death doulas.
Mhm.
Um, and once you have the reason I mentioned sort of palliative care as a activist kind of thing is once you've entered a place and started to teach and to provide that care, it impacts the entire system. It impacts the
Mhm.
hospital, the unit. Everybody wants to be involved in this kind of care. So
Mm.
palliative care is expert palliative care is delivered by experts, but general palliative care is delivered by so many more people. And
Right.
it's the kind of thing where once you see it, you start to be like, this is, of course, this is how we should be delivering care and practicing medicine. And so there really isn't like, what is palliative care? It just
Okay.
balloons and explodes. Sorry if that's
All right.
a esoteric.
No, no apologies. I'll just add from my own training as a
Yeah, yeah,
chaplain when I
of
did
course.
a unit of chaplaincy in a large urban hospital setting and was working with cancer patients nearing end of life. The palliative care doc asked for a chaplain consult because they were scheduling a terminal extubation, right? Which means that when we remove the intubation that was helping the patient breathe, that it was highly likely he would die very quickly. And the chaplain consult was to be able to support the family as they considered what the doctor was recommending in terms of his suffering, to end his suffering. So I have seen that in terms of the team approach where it's possible and how important
Mm.
it can be because the doctor, doesn't always get the answers that they're looking for from the family. And so working as a team from different angles to support the family. And it took a few days, but in that case, the wife needed some support in thinking about what was going to happen if she said yes to the terminal extubation and then walking through the steps together, me as a chaplain in terms of her Jewish practice and what did she want to happen Jewishly when her husband died, and they hadn't yet thought about that together. So I appreciate the reminder
Rabbi,
about the team approach. Yeah,
I think I don't know, I think the first time we met, I mentioned to you that I don't, if I can help it, I don't really go anywhere without a chaplain.
it's beautiful.
Seriously.
We should have
It's
more
some of
doctors like
my
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
some of my most important mentors and teachers were chaplains and social workers. Yeah.
Nice. We've gotten a little bit closer to what it is, and we know we have to talk to doctors to figure out how to access it. And you've made some suggestions on how we can talk to doctors. But I'm curious, it often gets mentioned with hospice. So can you help us understand what are the differences between palliative care and
Sure.
hospice, and what's your role in that as a palliative care doctor?
Yeah, hospice really is a delivery of palliative care for someone who has less than 6 months. So hospice really is just a care delivery system or a service that delivers palliative care to someone who has technically less than 6 months to live. It's a Medicare, Medicaid benefit. So it's sort of more of like a service, a technical thing. It's often delivered by a private company, or a company
Mhm.
can be affiliated with the health system. And so the medical directors at a hospice are often going to be palliative care clinicians working with a team of palliative care trained people. But palliative care, it can extend not just in the as you said, the dying phase, the last days or months, but really even for years. And palliative care, in the palliative care community, we're constantly talking about what is palliative care, right? Palliative care means so many different things to different people. Should that include patients who suffer with chronic pain as a chronic condition?
Mhm.
And I do. I care for a lot of people with chronic pain. So it is a practice that it can be very expansive, and it really
Mhm.
fits to meet the needs of the patients that we serve.
So a distinction is that hospice, you need to qualify as having a likelihood of 6 months or fewer if your
That's right.
disease progression takes its natural course. At palliative care, I can request at any time, even if I haven't been told that it's likely I will die within 6 months. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
That's a
Exactly.
helpful distinction.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of professionals here, in addition to the rest of us who live our lives in ways that we don't always talk about death or health. A lot of overlap between the two. What is it that you would want professionals to know about your work so that we can do our work in communities better? We have social workers and chaplains who are not
Mm,
in healthcare settings necessarily, but might benefit from helping the people we work with in community settings, whether it's the congregational rabbis who are here or the social workers at a Jewish family service who are here. What should they know about your work as professionals in the community?
the thing that I see get the most confused is this idea of choosing, that I have to choose palliative care or something else, or that, well, maybe not yet, or is it right for me? If you're thinking about it, look, I'm not saying to go and find a new doctor, but if you're already in the setting where you're getting care and you're already talking to health professionals, if it's already crossed your mind, I would just inquire about it.
Mhm.
It doesn't limit options. It doesn't take things away. I think that's
Mhm.
that's the greatest misconception I see. People think that it limits options. It certainly
Mhm.
does not limit options. Um, the other thing I'll say is the way that I frame palliative care, and certainly hospice as well, is I think that for all of us, like when it's time to do our taxes, we want the best account, right? When it's time to write a will, we want the best lawyer. When we want the best cardiologist. We want the best, right? We ask friends, who do you know? Who's good at this? Who really knows this? Who can fix my car? I mean, when you have a serious illness, you want palliative care to be part of your team, right? Somebody who understands the palliative care principles, because really at the end of the
Mhm.
day, that's what palliative care is. It's a set of principles. It's a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at the person, a way of looking at health. And hospice is the same, right? Hospice exists for a reason. We think it's free, right? For people who are with less than 6 months to live. It's free because we think it's a good thing. We want people to get it. You can always turn it off. You can always say, I changed my mind. I want to go get this other treatment. But it's, if you can get it's a good thing. It's the standard of care in many cases. So I would just urge the professionals when they're talking about it, it really shouldn't close options. Hospice gets a little more complicated with the payment structures and stuff.
Mhm.
But even then, you can usually negotiate the things you need, or you can just stop hospice if you feel like it's becoming a burden.
Mhm.
But these are people you want to be talking to. These are people you want to know. And some of us are scared of death. Um,
Yeah.
but but these are the people you want to talk to.
Are there stories that stand out to you from your work that you might share with us to help us understand whether it's the power of the work, or the complications,
Yeah.
considerations? What are the stories you tell your students? You're educating the next generation of healthcare professionals. What should we know?
The things that I often remember most are the times where I'm in the hospital. This may sound strange, when I'm in the hospital and I'm arguing let's not give up here. Let's not stop just yet. Let's try something else. And I'm not against, let's say, what the patient wants, for of course, right? But
Yes.
I think that clinicians have a lot to deal with, right? There's a lot going on, and they feel deeply, and they get frustrated like all of us. They want to do a good job. They get distraught when they feel like patients aren't recovering or not doing well. Um, I'll never forget when I was actually in my training. I was training in New York, and I was called to the intensive care unit because a young woman right around my age actually was suffering from severe depression, was in the ICU, and she was had been struggling with alcoholism. Ended up one thing led to another. Was in the ICU for about a month, which wasn't getting better. And they called me because we had to figure out what to do and to talk to her dad. And we had to talk. We had to really dive into what disability looks like.
Mm.
And this is an interesting part of the work, right? Because um, serious illness changes people. A lot of people struggle with who am I now with an illness?
Mhm.
Who will I become? Right? I think a lot of people, especially around dementia, people worry
Yes.
about who will I be and what will become of me. And this was a young woman who was, I think she was going to lose her legs,
Mm.
and the father was really struggling with whether we should allow that, whether we should live with that. There was other complications. It wasn't so simple as just being a person with and without her legs, of course. Um, but we had to, myself, and I was working with a clinical ethicist at the time, and we really had to advocate for the father and the patient. Let's continue with this care, and let's we're maybe we should take her legs off and see if we can give her a chance.
Mm.
Um, this was really hard because a lot of people think that we come in to just say, like, let's give up, let's stop, let's not do things. But that's not really true. I think we're there to hear people. We're there to really hear what people have to say and what's important to them.
Mm.
I'll stop
Yeah.
there and see. I mean,
Thanks.
maybe, and if you have any
Yeah,
questions
it's a
about that, I
beautiful
mean,
story. It reminds me of the Jewish obligation to do everything we can to save a life, right? We're allowed to break all the other laws in order to save a life. And it sounds connected to that case in some way, that the father didn't want his daughter to live without her legs. And yet you saw an opportunity to allow her to live by doing something drastic, potentially.
when I look at it, I see a bit of there's a lot of change that happens. There's a lot of there's this personhood, this attack of personhood, and the things that we thought we were going to have, and the things that maybe now we have instead. Um, and I wasn't there to tell him what to do, or no, you're wrong.
Right.
But it definitely was to say, there are other ways of looking at this. There are other ways of living, and I think we really wanted to get her voice in there, and that was hard. But this
Yeah.
was actually going to be the thing that gave us her voice.
Mm.
What do you think about all this?
Right. 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 Patient-centered care, as you say. So the last questions I want to ask you before we open it up for the questions that are coming in fast and furious in the chat is about the Jewish piece. You're a Jewish doctor. You're connected to Jewish community in lots of ways. What does your work look like when you're dealing with patients whose faith traditions have something to say, or they want their faith traditions to have something to say about their care?
Well, the first thing is that it's always less important to me what people's faith background is rather than what they believe.
Mhm.
I've never asked someone, well, we've gotten to, like, oh, what's your faith background? Sure. But really, what I want to know is, what do you believe?
Mm.
Right? What do you believe? What's important to you? What is the nature of the universe according to you? What does
Mhm.
it mean to be alive? What does it mean to die? Those are just absolutely fascinating questions to me, and uh,
Yeah.
and so I can't get to them quick enough when I'm in the room with someone. When it comes to to their faith. I mean, I've been in cases the where the family sat quietly while the community's rabbi was the surrogate,
Mhm.
right? Who maybe didn't even really know the person very well, but they were the one there to run the meeting and make the decisions. Um, which is, I think for a lot of people that would be a struggle. To be like,
Mhm.
who is this person? They don't, do they know the person? Um,
Mhm.
but but this was within the belief system of that patient,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah, we talk about that in our advanced care planning work, the halachic living will, which allows a spot in your living will to write the name of the rabbi that your family should consult with in making decisions. If it comes to, you can't make decisions for yourself and your healthcare proxy gets the call and the doctor needs an answer. A halachic living will allows for the healthcare proxy
Yeah.
to make that decision in conversation with the rabbi. Because for some families, doing death right is a value, maybe even built on superstition, if they may not be
Mm,
traditionally observant. We have seen this, right? What would Jewish tradition have me do, even if I
mm,
am, a pork
mm.
eating
Interesting.
person? And I think it's interesting to see where it comes up around palliative care. So I appreciate you lifting up this idea of what you believe is perhaps more important than how you identify on the religion spot on the intake form when you sign into the hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side of this is I've also seen people get in trouble when they make assumptions
Hmm.
about, people based on what they think oh, this is a Catholic, so they're not going to want
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z or some
Hmm.
such. Or Jehovah's Witness is a very common one.
Right.
I've had someone come in and the whole team was utterly convinced that we were going, we could not give them blood products and this was going to be a
Hmm.
very, and then I remember, I think it was either me or someone else had stopped and said, has anyone asked them if they believe that?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
they were like,
Thank.
oh, yeah, I probably should.
Yeah, we can't make assumptions. All right. So one more easier question, perhaps for you, and then I'm going to take some more questions from others. Books and podcasts you recommend. What should we read?
Yeah.
What should we listen to?
Um,
You can think about
I
it.
Yeah, maybe I'll say that one for the end. How does that sound?
Okay, fine. All right. So I'm going to go in random order here. What's the role of a
Sure.
palliative care provider, Roberta asks, with regard to helping the family support the patient and avoid being overwhelmed or feeling abandoned?
So I think that the question is that asking about advocacy in palliative care? Is that sort of
Yeah, what's the
the
what's the role you play in, the family construct and the patient's overwhelmed, the family's overwhelmed?
yeah. Well, the the first thing, well, something that I always teach my students, my fellows, is before the medicine, before the questions, you know, people, especially when we meet them, right? People are often either in the middle of the grind of the medical system or they've been doing it for a while. And the simplest but I think kindest thing you can do is to just let them know you're there to help them. Right. And I don't know if that sounds trite, but you would be surprised how, or maybe not, some would be surprised, um, the power of just stopping, because you get someone on the line, they just want to tell you their story. Will you hear me? Will you help me? Say, I hear you. Don't worry. We're here together. And like, we'll figure this out together. And the power of that is tremendous. And unfortunately, people just don't hear that enough. So I don't know if that answers the question.
It's helpful.
Um,
Yeah. So there's another question. There seems to be misconceptions about palliative care conflation with hospice, right? We know that, but you have helped us to define hospice as having 6 months or fewer if the disease takes its natural course. How do you engage with people who are resistant to engaging with palliative care because they have this fear that means, the end is near and I'm giving up?
yeah. Um, well, I'll say two things. One is I've never been thrown out of a room. So Really, I think people get really worried, especially other doctors. They're like, "Oh, are you going to go in there? I don't know. They're not ready." I've never been thrown out of a room.
That's great.
I walk in, you say hi, what's going on? Oh, by the way, I'm from palliative care. Cool. You're not you don't like you're here to take me on the boat with the boatman, right? Like but of course you have to meet people where they are, and some people really aren't ready to talk or talk about things. There's this notion in palliative care, and I'm sure a lot of the professionals on the line will recognize this. We call it talking about it. So like where there's this thing that's happening. Yeah, there's a thing that's happening. Oh, I love asking people, are you worried about anything? No, I'm not worried about anything. Okay. What about your wife? Is your wife worried about anything? Oh, she's terrified. She's terrified. Oh, what's she terrified of? I think she thinks I might be dying. Oh, interesting. But you're not worried. No, I'm not worried. There's a lot of different ways that you can talk about illness and things that people are really scared of. But us humans do such a good job of protecting ourselves in really unique ways. There's another, you put it in the box. When you're not ready to talk about it, you put the box on the shelf. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but today we'll talk about something else. So, I try not to get too worried about people's readiness.
Yeah.
People surprise you. They'll ask you for help when they're ready.
Yeah, that's helpful. We've had a few questions about medical aid in dying and voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And we put in a link to a series we did this winter on medical aid in dying. We spoke to an Orthodox rabbi. We spoke to a family who did go to Switzerland in a case of dementia. So we've got resources on that Jewishly. But the question really, I think, is about palliative care when it comes to someone who is looking
Mm.
into medical aid in dying and or voluntarily stopping eating and drinking if they're in a state where they can't access medical aid in dying.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics. um, it's very dependent on the person you encounter, unfortunately. I think that's one of the biggest problems
The
in
provider?
the provider. Yeah,
Uh,
it's one of the biggest problems I think in the U.S. around what we call hastening death, or even topics of hastening death. There's MAID and there's euthanasia and there's all these things, but what we're really talking about is how do people take back some control over the end of
mhm,
their life. Most people,
mhm,
that's what they're talking about.
right.
We're not even really talking about pain, right? The literature is pretty clear that there's so many things that people are concerned about. And unfortunately, it really just depends on who walks into the room,
Mhm,
whether you can ask them that or not. I guess the only piece of information, the only suggestion I would give is clinicians, some providers get really scared off if you say, I want to die. I'm ready to die. Help me die. Even though that's such a normal human thing to say, right?
mhm,
I think we all know what that feels like to wonder, where is our place? Is there a place for us? Where should I be? What should I be doing? Is this life worth living? Right? Like it's such a normal human thing. But when we express it in a clinical setting to a provider who doesn't know what that means or isn't ready to hear it, it can be very scary for them, unfortunately. They don't often know how to respond. I think a good rule of thumb is just to um, feel the person out before you're ready to throw the really hard question at them.
mhm. Okay, that's helpful. So, if we're talking from the patient side, we can explore whether we think our providers might be open to having conversations
Yeah.
about palliative care in a case where I might be thinking about medical aid in dying or otherwise hastening death.
I did see one thing come up there, which is I think quite profound. The question about should that be brought up to palliative care providers? I can't help myself because it's really one of my areas of interest. This sort of palliative care aid and dying
Yeah.
section. I will say that if you have this question like, "Hey, I've been thinking about the end of my life and maybe even hastening it. What does that look like? How can I do that?" Certainly, a palliative care person should have the skills and understanding and know how to answer that. The only caveat I'll say is that hastening death in the world of palliative care is still quite divisive. I think a lot of palliative care people feel very strongly that, like, no, we are not there to shorten people's days. We are only there to treat suffering, and they're quite staunchly against any notion of cutting time short.
Mm,
So there is this tension in palliative care between, I think these are palliative care. These are patients that need palliative care, right? Certainly
mhm.
anyone who's thinking about all those questions, right? Doctor, will you help me die? Why am like, do I need to go through this? You should be able to ask a palliative care person that, but just be aware that there is still that tension in palliative care.
That's super helpful, especially as it becomes increasingly available and problematic all at once here in the
Yeah.
United States. Okay, different question. Do you ever see conflicts between the palliative care doctor team providers and the other specialists or primary providers?
Yes.
What does it look like? And how do we, the patient in the bed and the family supporting, deal with that?
Yeah. Um, well, in order to help people, I think we all have to work together. And again, I know that maybe sounds trite, but what I mean by it is, um, even if I see things differently than another clinician, it's really important to me that I remind myself that even if they're maybe missing something, not looking at who the person is or what's important to the person, um, it's usually an issue with skill or practice or background. It's not, nobody's there to hurt other people. As I was saying earlier, we need to create a culture in medicine where everybody sees what we're doing, and so much of palliative care is teaching others, right? It's patient care, but m- even more than 50% of what I do is counseling and teaching other clinicians. That being said, if you're passionate about what you do, and from time to time you're not, getting into a bit of a getting into a bit of something with the other clinicians, you're probably
Mhm.
not, caring enough. I don't know how to say it better. There comes
Right.
times where you do have to stick up for a patient,
Uh-huh.
and never with cruelty or being mean, but sometimes you do have to say, that we're not treating this patient well. We need to do
Right.
better.
Right. That's helpful. And a reminder from our friend and colleague Miriam Radner from MJHS Hospice and Palliative Care here in New York, that curative treatment can still be given while on palliative care, which is the difference between another difference between palliative care
Yeah.
and hospice, right? If I'm in treatment for cancer, I can
Yeah.
continue my chemotherapy and access palliative care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we know from your bio that you split your time between DC and Tel Aviv. And while Shomer Collective's work is focused on the United States because our healthcare system is broken and challenging enough, that it's hard for us to talk about things globally. I know we have folks here from Israel. And so there's a question, is palliative care becoming more accepted in Israel? Are there any problems because of the lack of separation between religion and state?
That's a great question. So yes, palliative care is very much available in Israel. There are wonderful hospices here. There are growing palliative care teams at most health systems. Still, ways to go. Certainly not akin to some of the bigger, impressive teams like we have in New York, California. But yeah, it exists. Something that I learned quite quickly here, when I thought there would be such a cultural difference, caring for people. And then it turns out people are people. And maybe they say it in a different accent or in a different language, but they say the same things when they're sick, when they're scared, when they're worried about their loved ones. Some of the technical end of life questions are definitely a little different here because Israel has a pretty unique Patient Dying Act, which is a very unique law. Um, I won't get too much into the details, but there really isn't. I don't think there's a comparable kind of law anywhere in the world. Leave it to Israel to do that. But so it does complicate some end of life things. It was put together in the aughts in an attempt to really, actually, it was made to promote palliative care. It makes palliative care into something that needs to be like given, that needs to be
Hmm.
offered. So in a way, it's pro thinking about end of life. It's very Jewish in that way, right? It's like
Hmm.
we're not gonna run around. We're gonna like look at this straight on and deal with this. Um, but it does complicate other of the more technical things in dying care,
Hmm.
especially around complex medical technologies at the end of life. So
Right.
I'll leave it there, but it's quite fascinating.
Helpful. Thank you. If we wanted to find a doctor like you, because you said good things and, we want you to be our doctor, how do we get a referral if we're in a state that you don't live and work and consult in?
You know, I think your best bet is to just ask your doctor or
Mhm.
your nurse or your whoever's around. I think that's always a good place to start. Most people know what's local, and if they haven't offered it to you, it's probably because they just haven't thought of it. And they
Mhm.
probably do know someone who can offer it or to help you.
Mhm.
Or maybe there's a hospice or maybe they can go look into it, right? They'll be like, you know what, I'll let you know. I'll go back to my desk and I'll Google it. I think that's just a good way to start. It has the positive effect of again, it's not like someone else coming in to fix things or help. It makes things a little more organic, especially if you're trying to maintain relationships in your care.
Mhm.
Um, and then if all else fails, I think there's some really great resources. I think you can just Google, like, there's palliative care
Mhm.
organizations.
Good.
There's really great advocacy groups in all the states. CAPC I mentioned earlier is a great
Mhm.
resource.
Mhm. Great. Center to Advance Palliative Care,
Yeah.
CAPC. I'm going to take a couple of questions that are Jewish in nature while
Yeah.
you think about what books and podcasts is going to be your last question, I think. So, one of the questions we got was, what's the role of Tehillim, which is saying Psalms in palliative care? And I will just say that from the Jewish perspective, prayers are always welcome. And if they feel supportive to the patient, to the family, to the person who is concerned about the patient or the family, then they should be said at any time. One of the interesting things about the specifics of prayer when it comes to serious illness and end of life is that we continue to pray for the person who may not recover from their illness. We may wish them to recover from their illness, and that the rabbis recognize that at some point there may not be a meaningful recovery, but we can think about the words of the liturgy more holistically. What do I mean by that? If I'm not going to recover from my physical ailments, maybe my soul will come to a place where it is feeling whole and supported. So there are still ways to understand the prayers and the language that's used in liturgy around illness as supportive of the person, even if a cure is no longer possible. The other question that came up around Jewish stuff was medical technology enables people to exist for a long time, but they're not living, according to the person who writes this. This process is certainly cruel, according to the person who writes this, to the patient and even more so to the family. So here we have questions and judgments about quality of life. Cannot we look at medical maintenance as preventing the angel of death delivering its message? So let me offer one thing here from a rabbinic perspective, which our teachers, Shlomo Brody from the organization Ematai, which is focused on Jewish law, Orthodox interpretations of Jewish law around end of life. And another teacher we've had, Rabbi Jason Weiner, who is the chaplain at Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles, have helped me to understand that DNR, do not resuscitate, it can also be understood as AND, allow natural death to happen. And even the traditional rabbis in our midst would allow natural death to happen if suffering is not treatable. If the suffering can't be minimized, then why would we want to continue life in a way that increases suffering and doesn't allow death to happen? So we see the rabbis allowing for death to happen if suffering cannot be reduced. And I just wanted to put that out there. So now your turn. Books, podcasts.
Um, I mean, I feel like this is like you know, everyone's read this and it's going to be so obvious, but Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, I find myself going back to it over and over. Um, and I find something new every time I reread it.
Hmm.
Um, Another one that I've really loved, and it's not really, it's a bit adjacent, and it gets into my work a little bit in disability, is Ellen Sachs' The Center Cannot Hold. Um, so much of seriously ill care is this transformation that we all go through, right? It's um, um, I'm blanking on the quote. It's really all of us sort of going, leaving the land of what we thought of the healthy, right, into the land of the
Hmm.
sick. And this transformation is the thing that can cause so much suffering,
Hmm.
um, as we adjust and change. Um, so I've learned a lot from both of those books about change
Beautiful.
and loss.
Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So, listen, it has been too short to really cover all
So
the questions and the topics, but a privilege and a pleasure to get to have this conversation. Thank you for giving of your time, your generosity of spirit, especially, and being willing to have the conversation with a whole group of strangers from all over the world. I
super
hope
fun.
that your work continues to be successful in getting more people access to the support that you and the teams you work with offer.
I just want to thank you,
Please.
first of all. This has been a lot of fun. And I just want to thank everybody who came. I mean, so much of this is getting the word out there and just talking about it, normalizing it. So
Yeah.
I think we're all important here.
Amen, but amen. Dr. Potash, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for being here with us
And
today. Take care, friends.